Very good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone to participate in today's very interesting topic workshop on the collective bargaining in an inflationary environment. We just had talked. It's becoming a very heated topic everywhere. I mean, due to many factors. And we are very happy today. We have Luis Campos from Argentina, who give us lectures on this. And in the lectures, we have learned that the trade unions use the collective bargaining to protect wages during the inflationary period of time in Argentina. And so the workshop will be conducted more in the question and answer session alike. And there are two main questions that come out of the discussions under your video lecture. So these two questions, in between, we open the floor for questions. So please allow me to go to the first questions. So Luis, you asked at the end of the lecture, is collective bargaining for higher wages to adjust for higher inflation situations from the macroeconomic perspective? And it is very sustainable. Many of our participants concerned the capability of the employers, especially the small, medium-sized companies, their capability to pay. So the dilemma lies to who, either the working class or the capitalists, should bear the cost of the solving the inflations. Some propose to keep the wage increase restricted to each industry or to the individual industry sectors. In these cases, it might not cause the overall increase of the wage to deteriorate rate of the inflation. And we want to know what's your idea on this. And very welcome again, Luis. Please, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Cheng. Thank you, Lira, and thank you, the group, for this opportunity to have this meeting and this exchange. First of all, before jumping into the question, I would like to take, I don't know, maybe 1 or 2 minutes just to present ourselves, because we are not so many. So I think we could just say your names and country or organization. It would be interesting, at least to me, to know you a little bit more. So my name is Luis Campos. I'm from Argentina. I'm from the Argentinian Trade Union Workers Confederation.
Yes, it would be, let's do this way. You pass to the next speaker and you just invite it and we do a very quick self.
Okay, I have my comrade and colleague, Nicolas Bravo, from the same country. So Nico, go to you.
Well, I'm Nicolas. I'm glad to be with friends and colleagues from some time already. I'm an anthropologist. I'm affiliated to the State Workers Association, ATE, in Argentina, and we have been interacting a bit with Luis. And it's a very interesting opportunity, because something that used to be very characteristic of Argentina, which is inflation, is becoming a worldwide issue. So very, very happy to be here with friends and colleagues.
Yes, Nicolas, you have to pass to the next one.
Okay, to my friend Benji.
Thanks, Nicolas. Benji Velasco. I'm from the Philippines. I teach at the University of the Philippines, but I also have been with the labor movement for a long time before entering the academy. Yeah. And at the moment, similar to what has Cheng said, there's demand for wage increases. And so there's a debate around the impact of wage hikes on either employment or both employment and prices. I'll call on Monirul.
Yeah, thank you. Good evening. This is Monirul Kobi. I am a trade union activist in Bangladesh. Actually, I have been working for a National Trade Union Federation, which is Jatiya Samiti Bangladesh, and I play role as the International Affairs Secretary of the Federation. Thank you.
Okay, let me invite George, please.
Okay, thank you. My network is not so good, so I will be off the camera for a longer time. And I'm George Paul Williams, and from the National Health Workers Union of Liberia. I am currently in Lomé, Togo, and I'm happy to be here because for this reason, they called me the troublemaker in my country. Thank you.
Yes, and Jokania.
Hello, everybody. My name is Jokania Maopa. I'm an organizer with the Food Federation Allied Workers Union of Zimbabwe, where I work as an organizer in Zimbabwe. Basically, we organize workers in the food industry. And I'm also the regional chairperson for the national center, that is the Zimbabwe Congress of Trade Unions.
Great. Yes, I think everyone knows Indira. So,
okay.
Yeah, so maybe I do a very quick on. My name is Chen Li, and now I'm the postdoc at Unicamp here in Brazil. I worked in the Uni Global Uni in Singapore before. Yeah.
Okay, so shall I take it home? Yeah. Okay. Oh, well, again, thank you, everybody, to stay here and to share your opinions, your experiences. First of all, I would like to make some just presentation of the problem, because as Nicolas said, in Argentina we have had a strong experience on inflationary environments. Basically, we don't have to solve it, but we know how to live with it. Just to share some basic facts, Argentina has lived with inflation over 25% year over year for the last 15 years. Nowadays, the inflation in Argentina is over 50% year over year. And for example, just some news from this week. Yesterday, the Commerce Federation has signed an agreement, wage agreement, with an increase that will reach almost 60% in the next year. So it started with 6%, 6% increase next month, 6% the following month, 10%, 11%, you know, like different monthly increases that will reach almost 6% by next year. And the public sector union, the union which Nicolas belongs to, has just closed the last year wage agreement with a 64% increase in wages a year. So these are numbers, these are figures that are really difficult to understand in a normal macroeconomic situation, because, you know, if wages increase by 50% a year, that means that most of the prices in the economy are moving at a similar path. So yeah, we don't know how to solve this problem. It's a huge problem, but we are more or less used to live with it. But well, that is the case in Argentina. And I wanted to stress that at the beginning, because before answering your question, Cheng, I think that we need to distinguish different regimes of inflation. Just I don't want to start a huge presentation about that, but at least we need to consider three different situations. You know, a situation in which inflation comes from external factors, situations in which inflation seems to be something extraordinary. So, for example, nowadays in most of the countries around the globe, inflations are related not to wages, not to the push between capital and labor, but particularly are related with the consequences of COVID and the problems in the global value chains and global supply chains, and also with the problems of the increase in international prices of commodities related to post-COVID and also to the war in Ukraine. So the problem with prices in energy, the prices in food, that has impacts worldwide and generate inflations in most of our countries. And we could say, and allow me just this preliminary conclusion, that is an inflation caused by external factors. And it's an extraordinary process. So this is the case, first case. The second case are regimes of high inflation, such as Argentina's, which you not only have the problem of the external shocks, but also you have the problem of the inertia and the problem of indexation of the economy. You know, given the fact that last year inflation was around 50%, and that we know that this year inflation will be more or less 50 to 60%, everybody is changing the prices, labor, goods, public services, the exchange rate, everything is indexating, everything is changing the price every day. So the problem is similar, but it's not the same. And we will see this a little bit further. And then this will be the second type of regimes. And the third type of regimes are the hyperinflation regimes. Nowadays, we don't have these experiences worldwide, but we have had a hyperinflation situation in Venezuela a few years ago. And my comrade from Zimbabwe could give us a lesson about the problem of hyperinflation. In Argentina, we had hyperinflation problems in the 80s, but this is another kind of inflation regime. So now we need to have these three different topics in mind when we speak about inflation regimes, and when we speak about the problem of the relation between wages and prices, because it's not the same in any case. We could say that hyperinflation are exceptional situations that are not common situations. So I will not enter into that, but just take in mind, though, take into consideration the two different situations. You know, the problems of external shocks and extraordinary increases in inflation, and the problem of the high inflation regimes, which are slightly different. So, jumping to the questions, to the first question, the problem of the small and medium enterprises. Well, yeah, absolutely, it's a problem, because if you push for a general wage increase that impacts with no differentiation between huge companies and small and medium enterprises, that could be a problem also for capital and for the workers of those small companies. But from my point of view, I would say that it's not a problem of the wage regime, because it will be dangerous if you established a two type of wage treatment for different kind of workers. You know, for example, if in one industrial sector you treat workers from a big companies very different than the treatment you give to the workers in the small and medium enterprises, then you are creating two types of workers, and you, in a way, you break, or you contribute to break the solidarity to workers, because you have workers, first-class workers, the ones that work in the huge companies that have better wages and better working conditions, and then second-class workers that are the ones who work for small and medium companies, who will end with lower wages and worse living conditions. And then you could say, okay, and then you have third-class workers, which are the ones that are not in wage relations. So I think that if you are planning a strategy from the labor movement to deal with this problem, you will need to avoid those solutions that create different regimes for workers, depending on which kind of company they work in. And of course, how to deal with the problem of the scale of the profits for the small and medium companies. Well, I think that you need to include other dimensions of the state intervention. So, for example, for the small and medium companies, you could say that the state should intervene not in a wage regime, but should intervene in the tax regime, should intervene in the credit regimes, should intervene creating public purchase procedures or mechanisms that allow small and medium companies to participate in the public purchase programs in a better position than the huge companies. So I think that if we just focus the situation on the wage price problem, then we are accepting the position of capital, and then we are in the middle of a trap, because there is no way out. So we need to say, okay, let's discuss the wage at the industrial level if we can. And I would prefer to discuss wages at the industrial level, but it will also depend on any country, and it will also depend on any productive structure and any trade union structure. Not every trade union can discuss wages at the industrial level. But well, if it were by me, I would suggest to discuss wages at the industrial level. But in order to deal with the small and medium enterprises, I would say that it would be better to include other dimensions in which the state has a strong possibility of intervening, such as I said, tax regimes, credit regimes, public purchase programs, etc. So regarding the industrial level of bargain, well, yeah, as I said, in general terms, in abstract terms, I prefer the industrial level collective bargaining, but it depends on the context. If you are in a country in which the collective bargaining system is strong, then it could work to establish wages at the industrial level. But if you are in a country in which the collective bargaining system is weak, then you will probably need a stronger intervention from the state to create general wage increases in order to deal with the inflation problem. And then it comes the second part of the question. I think that it's related with the second question you shared with me, Cheng, which is, well, what is the impact of these increases of wages in inflation? Is it true, as the employer said that if you increase wages, that will result in an increase of the price? But maybe we could discuss this later.
Yes, maybe. I think that's maybe we would have already people have questions on this. And thanks very much, Luis. I think that's really nice. So you deconstruct these questions of inflation, because whenever people came to the topics, often generalize same inflation situation, also generalized by different contexts. Just for everyone we just updated a reading for this unit in our platform. Is the Y directive on adequate minimum wages is the right approach in a time of inflation? Please take time to read this, because that's exactly as Luis talking. This article is more talking about in the Europe, and also I think that's also very nice. We need some research to say actually. In the case of Europe, especially now in the COVID situation, it was at least was showing increased minimum wage does not really cause, or it's very insignificant cause the inflation. So I think these are something very contextual based. So now we are open for questions. So regarding to this, the first part, please feel free to either use the chat box or raise your hand. We are now open to questions. Yes, Indira, please.
Thanks a lot, Luis. My question is more, it's a bit in relation to situations in which, you know, there is not much of industrial bargaining, which is basically the case in much of the global south, and of the interventions of the government. So you mentioned tax and credit regimes for SMEs. And I was wondering also, how about the distribution policies? Because I understand in inflationary situation. Sure. I understand that in inflationary situation, can you hear me?
Sorry, yeah. Now it's okay.
I understand in inflationary situation, the government is also able to actually collect more revenues, right? So then does it mean it has more space for actually distributional policies, you know, and could that be something that the trade unions could bargain then at, then it would be at really confederative level if you don't have really this sectoral bargaining. So, and do we have experience?
Yes, I think Luis, maybe because we have a few questions, so maybe you can first respond to Indira, then we go into for Modiru.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. I think that in many countries in the global south, we are having a discussion on some topics such as the basic income regimes or general income mechanisms, which are related with the distribution issues, distribution policies. Yes, and this is not only related to the problems of the weak collective bargaining systems, but also related with the problem of the informal sectors and the self-work, the self-work, because you could have a weak collective bargaining system, but a huge formal sector, which allows you to implement different tools. But if you have both a weak collective bargaining system and a weak formal labor market, so that the problem is bigger, and it's probably the case in many countries in the global south. So, as we said, extraordinary situations leads you to extraordinary measures, and it could be probably the case for discussing a different tax regime and to link the tax reforms to the distribution issues. It will lead us to another discussion, but I just wanted to share with you an experience that we have had last year in Argentina. The government passed a law implementing an extraordinary tax to the richest people, to the wealthiest people of the country. It affected, I don't remember exactly the figures, but it was more or less 12,000 people. You know, it's nothing. But the 12,000 richest people of the country, and it was a huge amount of money. And that allowed to implement certain income policies to protect the poor people in the context of COVID. So it was an extraordinary law. Many of us believe that we should discuss if this extraordinary policy should be permanent and not a one-year tax, which was the case. But yeah, we could discuss that because, for example, we have, I think, 6 people in the list of the 1,000 richest persons, people in the world. 6 of them or 4 of them are Argentinians. And I imagine that probably in most of your countries, there are 1 or 2 in that list. And again, 12,000 people in a population over 45 million is basically nothing. But given the wealth of those 12,000 people, it was a huge amount of money and allowed the government to implement this social protection network, again, for the poorest people, and it was not enough, but it's a way to continue to discuss and to think about when you don't have, as I said, a strong formal labor market or strong collective bargaining systems. So I think that, yeah, in those cases, trade unions could try this path, and maybe it could be interesting to explore the tax part more than the collective bargaining when you are too weak in one side, but maybe you can create a force relation, a social force relation to push for change in the tax system, and then to create this kind of income programs that reaches not only formal workers but also informal and self workers.
Yes, thanks a lot, Luis. That's very interesting, and let's also hope for long run this tax policy would be a little bit more for long run. Now let's open the question to Moniru. Please take the floor.
Thank you for giving me to a question. In Bangladesh, there is no national minimum wage, and even around 45 sectoral minimum wage has been existing. But after COVID, some sector is not implement properly the minimum wage. Employer didn't give the wage to the workers according to their minimum wage structure. But so how we can raise the collective bargaining actually in this context? But the government is not declare any national minimum wage yet. So in public sector, government adjust their salary according to the money inflation, in national. But the sectoral workers didn't give the inflationary salary. So how to raise their voice to achieve their proper wage from their collective bargaining and activities or process from the employer. Is it clear?
Luis, is that question clear for you?
Sorry, I couldn't hear clearly.
Okay. I am saying again. In Bangladesh there is no national minimum wage, and around 45 sector has been declared the minimum wage, but most of the sector, in most of the sector, the workers did not give the salary according to the minimum wage structure. Number one. Number two, after COVID, there is some inflation in Bangladesh. In private, public sector, government has paid the salary on the basis of national inflation, but in sectoral workers, they did not receive the wage according to the inflation. So as my understanding, it is very important. But every year, money inflation is occurred in nation, but the workers keep not the salary on the basis of inflationary. For this way, the workers receive salary. I think it's not increasing but decreasing, because their value of the wage is decreasing. So now, in this situation, what the sectoral workers can do to achieve the inflationary wage through their collective bargaining?
Yes, thanks a lot. And since we have not many people here, so Juknia, would you like to raise your questions directly? Okay, then maybe then I read here in the chat box the question by Juknia. In Zimbabwe, we almost negotiate on a monthly basis, but the employers and the government always argue that wages were also driving the inflation up. So what could be the best strategy to counter this? Yeah, no, maybe we can also collect the question from Nicholas, and then we can move to the next one. Yeah, Nicholas, please.
Yeah, in fact, I have two questions, but I will focus on one, given that the other one is too local. But the question I have is, given I'm not so familiar with global history of inflation, and I'm not sure whether we have, I mean, if the modern global economy has faced a global inflation with the particularities we are assisting. And I'm not an expert, but I'm reading even in groups, global groups, with people asking whether the impact of the war in Ukraine and the COVID, how it has been impacting in every country. Even the price of oil in the US has been in the headlines. So my question is, are there global mechanisms to counterbalance price and wages distortions that cannot be used by the capital to increase benefits? Because in my understanding, if wage distortion is a fact pretty much described as Luis was saying, I mean, Bangladesh has very weak mechanisms to counterbalance this. So probably Nike or whatever the company is making profit in Bangladesh, they are getting more and more profit. Now, so my question is, are there mechanisms, like global mechanisms, where unions can prevent this, or isn't a good opportunity to go back to the roots of internationalism? Because in my understanding, we are in a context where capitalism is increasing even more the possibility of getting profit of wage distortion. And I hope my question is clear. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Moniru, Joconia, Nicolas. Okay, yeah, interesting questions. The three of, well, maybe four of them. Okay, let's start with Moniru. Okay, I think you pointed two different situations that go to the key of the problem. First of all, the idea of having a minimum wage, either general or sectorial, it doesn't matter. It's a historical demand. I wouldn't say the whole trade union movement, but in many countries, many of our countries, we have fight for having minimum wages or sectorial minimum wages. But even when we have these mechanisms, then we have the problem of employees that pay under the minimum wage, no matter if it's a general minimum wage or sectorial minimum wage. And that's a huge problem. And we have also in Argentina, in a country in which probably you know, we have a strong trade union movement, strong collective bargaining system, and even so, we have a lot of workers who are underpaid, who receive wages below the minimum wage, the general minimum wage or the sectoral minimum wage. And I think it's a problem that goes beyond the policies. It's a problem that you cannot address from the state policies. Of course, it could be an interesting tool to strengthen the labor police and the inspections of the Ministry of Labors, but at the end of the way, the solution to these problems to strengthen the labor movement. That there is no way to deal with employees that don't comply with the law if we don't have a strong labor movement, if we don't have a strong trade unions. And that's a problem because we are talking about countries in which the trade unions are not strong enough. So I think that problem, it's a problem that we have to deal with in many of our countries. And yeah, of course, it's a huge problem. The second problem, as Muriel pointed, is that, okay, when we have when inflation started to be a problem again in our economies, we have had different kinds of responses in different countries. For example, many countries, they tried to implement some kind of trigger clauses. In the collective bargaining, they included clauses that triggers wage increases in the case of certain increase in inflation. And they could help, they could be a good tool, but again, then you have employers or sectors that resist the implementation of these trigger clauses. So in the end, it's a problem of the relation of forces. You need to strengthen the collective organizations in order to deal with this problem, and in order to, for example, implement the collective bargaining system, these trigger clauses in order to protect wages against the inflation process. Regarding Yokoni, I think that your question goes directly to the second question Cheng proposed this morning. I don't know, Cheng, if you want me to deal with it now, or maybe we can take it into consideration for the second part.
Yes, I think it's definitely connected. So allow me to post it here.
Okay. So just give me a minute to jump into Nicolas' question, because yeah, absolutely, I think that we don't have global mechanisms to deal with it. It's interesting because we were speaking with Lida and Cheng a few minutes before we started that that inflation at the global level, it's not something new. We have had this kind of situations in the 60s and the 70s. But nowadays it's completely different, because in the 60s and the 70s, it was very related with a push between labor and capital. The inflation 50 years ago was one of the responses of capital against the threat of labor, and was part of that fight. But nowadays, inflation that has nothing to do with wages. Inflation doesn't come from wages, but of course affect wages and affect profits. So it's interesting because it's not something new, but in a way it is. And we don't have these global mechanisms as Nicolas proposed. I think that we should discuss, we should open the discuss among our organizations on how to deal with it at the global level, because we are focused on fighting against inflation at the national level. But of course, it's a global problem. So, the national fights are okay, but are useless when you don't deal with it as a global problem. And I think that another problem, we are not going to deepen this dimension in today's workshop. But the other problem is the huge financialization of the system and the creation of bubbles all around the world, which at the same time leads to increases in the commodity price at the global level. So, for example, nowadays, the inflation on the prices of soya and corn and any food we eat every day, double or triple in dollars, makes no sense, because it's not a problem of production. It's not a problem of emission of money. It's a problem of bubbles that creates money from betting in the finance system, and it's a huge change compared to the 70s or the 60s. So I think that both problems are connected. Of course, for the GLU, it has been one of the key topics, and I know that there are some readings and lectures about financialization and how to deal with that, and how to present alternative proposals to that. But I think that are closely linked to what Nicolas pointed out.
Yes, thank you. I think that one point you mentioned is really important. Like the wages are not necessarily cause the inflation, but definitely inflation would impact on wage. That's exactly, I think, with the question from Jokania, and maybe I also connect with the second question. It's like, maybe we should also emphasize our research from the labor unions, trade unions, to have more research and more articulations to say exactly how much does the wage increase of minimum wage or the increased wage really caused the inflation. It already have some research in other countries, but I think that's something, the gap in the developing countries. Yes, so now we go into the second questions, which is for the long run. And many participants agreed and urged for taking the salaries in relation to living wage as one of the solutions. So in your video lecture, you also mentioned that the uni managed living wage, demanded living wage instead of an increase in the minimum wage in Argentina. So we want to know how does it being developed and how is it going now in Argentina? Maybe you can together with the question from Jokani. Thanks.
Yeah, okay. So let me start with Jokani's question. Because this idea of the wages as cause of inflation, we should need to distinguish different the first types I introduced this morning, because when you're talking about an external shock that causes inflation, then wages has nothing to do with that. But when you are in the second type, when you are in the middle of a process in which inertia has something to do with inflation, by inertia I mean that, okay, if the last year's inflation was over 50%, then everybody thinks that inflation will be more or less the same this year. So even wages will be increased that way, and then it's more problematic how to deal with that, because you couldn't say, okay, let's stop the increase in prices, but then the wages jump by 30 or 40%. So it creates some macroeconomic problems, which then you need to deal with all of them as a whole. But that's a problem for high inflation regimes such as Argentina's. But I think it's not a problem of many countries in the world. It's like, I don't know, maybe around 10 countries in the world are under this kind of regimes nowadays. But the problem that Joconia pointed out, it's interesting because, yeah, of course, employer says, if we increase wages, then that will impact on prices. But let's put it in the other way. Okay, and if wages goes down, then that will that mean that prices will go down? Because, for example, in Argentina, in the last 4 years, real wage dropped by 20%. And what about the prices? No, it's a relationship just working in one way, but not in the other one. So it makes no sense when you think it from the other side. Of course, it's not an automatic thing that you say, okay, I'm pushing for a 5% increase, and then I assume that it won't have nothing to do with it won't have any impact on prices. It doesn't work like that. But it will depend on investment. It will depend on how this increase in the aggregate demand impact on the production. It will depend on, for example, if there is an increasing in the aggregate demand, and then you can deal with that with an increase in production, then it won't be a problem for prices. But on the other side, you push for a huge, or if you push for an increase in the aggregate demand, and then you cannot deal with that in the field of the production, then yeah, you could have a problem regarding prices. So you need to deal with both dimensions at the same time. When you push for increasing in wages, you need to know from a macroeconomic perspective that we are pushing for an increase in the aggregate demand. And if there is an increase in aggregate demand, then we will need an increase in production, which will depend on investment, will depend on the productive structure of the country, will depend on the external balance of the country. If this aggregate demand goes to jump in imports, it would be one thing, but it will lead to a better situation for local producers. That would be different. So I would say that there is no automatic mechanism that links wage increases to prices increases, but there could be a relation, and that relation is, I think that you need to include the dimension of production in the same debate, because if you don't include the idea of an increase in production, then again we are in the middle of the trap, because of course, the employers would say, okay, it's an increase in my cost, then I just automatically include that increase into my prices. It's a mathematic equation. So we need to go beyond this debate, including the dimension of production. We have to deal with that, and maybe the Japanese question, which is what could be the best strategy to counter this, is okay, if we are trying to create an aggregate demand increase, then we need to increment the production in order to give responses to those demands from workers which have more wages. So I think that could be the best way to deal with that. Regarding the question, I know that we don't have plenty of time. In Argentina, I would say that trade unions used to demand a living wage instead of minimum wage, particularly because they are focused on the formal sector, and that we have a strong collective bargaining system for formal workers. So it's something slightly similar than they have in central countries such as Germany some years ago, or the Scandinavian countries, countries in which they don't like very much the idea of minimum wage because they have strong trade unions and they have strong collective bargaining systems. So they said, we don't need to fight for minimum wage because we can live, we can fight for a living wage for everybody, and we have the trade unions for that. So in Argentina, trade unions used to fight for a living wage and used to fight to include the living wage, the idea of living wage in the collective agreements. But in the last 2 or 3 decades, I would say, in Argentina, the informal sector has grown a lot, and people in the informal sector created organizations similar to trade unions. They are not trade unions, but they're slightly similar. And they said, okay, it's difficult for us to fight for a living wage because we don't have an employer to deal with, but we could fight for minimum wage for everybody that should be higher and higher. And then today, probably the most interested people fight for minimum wage increase are workers in the informal sector and trade unions, I would say, in the informal sector. And they created some links. For example, we have a social program, which is a huge one. It calls Argentina Works, that in which the state pays those workers. They are around 1 million workers. The state pays them 50% of the minimum wage. So for those workers, it's strategic to fight for increasing the minimum wage. More than for the trade unions. Trade unions don't care about that. The sectorial minimums in the collective agreements are like, they double the minimum wage at the national level. But the most interested workers in the fights for minimum wage are the informal workers and these informal trade unions. And I think that it's like a two-speed discussion. It's a discussion, one discussion for the formal workers and one discussion for the informal workers. And I think that the challenge for the trade union movement is not to create 2 types of workers, not first-class workers and second-class workers. The challenge for the trade union movement as a whole is to link both, because if we don't do that, then we are fighting workers against workers. Okay, that has been more or less the experience in Argentina.
Yes, thanks so much, Luis. I think that's a very, very good analysis. Also, I think we don't have enough time for calling the questions. But I would just to say, just referring a little bit as what Nicholas was asking. I also think that's very interesting and maybe something very urgent as well, because we know today the food inflation caused by this international like war things. It's pretty much we don't have the regulation in the forward market, and we don't have much global mechanism to regulate the future market as well. And we know today the trade in many of the food materials are in the future market, not really by the conventional trading situations. So I think that would be something we could also think in a very macro way. And thanks so much for Luis. And this is a very complicated questions because in referring to today of the inflations, it's very contextual based, even for the country and within the country. We also know we are evolving with different period of time and different factors are causing for that. And today we are more in the period like maybe growth without employment, growth without production, so much of the economy being financialized. So the thing is not that the very conventional this inflation causations. But anyway, thanks so much for everyone to participate in today's workshop. Very happy to have Luis.